we can't rely on somebody saying that they are 10 years old. We have to treat everybody that we don't know in the virtual world as if they could have nefarious intentions, right? So just because your kid says, "Oh yeah, I'm talking to another 8th grader in Madison, Wisconsin," the parent should always go, "That could be an adult," or it could be a teenager with nefarious intentions too, right? So you just never take anything at face value, I think is one just sort of like overarching thing to stick in your back pocket. But a couple of things to look for are asking questions, personally identifiable information-based questions. So where do you live? How old are you? Where do you go to school? Now, granted, kids love to just talk about that stuff. We see kids engage in Roblox and Minecraft when we're doing our research. They are so willing to be like, "My name is Billy and I'm 8 and I live in Wisconsin," because it's human nature to want to connect.
Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you?
I'm a little cold and a little snowed in on the East Coast here, but other than that, and we hear about our guest who's up is pretty cold too, in Minnesota. But I'm doing fine otherwise. I know you are too. We're going to get into this very interesting guest in a minute, but I want to let our listeners and our audience know, if you listened to last week's episode about my friend Joe Welch's homicide from 28 years ago, and we had on the chairman of the Citizens Crime Commission. That Crime Stoppers episode was supposed to air last weekend, but because of the big storm in the East, and I think it was an NBA game that ran late or something, they're now airing it this weekend, and that would be February 1st, Crime Stoppers. And that'll be on abc6.com and on the Citizens Crime Commission website, and we'll also put it up on our Cold Red website once it's out there. So anything we can do for Joe, anyone out there, we would appreciate that. Ray, why don't you introduce our guest for tonight?
Well, tonight's show is a little bit different. It's about digital shadows. We're tracking the unseen with Jessica Smith. Jessica Smith is the owner of Click Safe Intelligence. And I'm not going to tell you much about it. I'm going to let Jessica tell you about that. But Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I was really excited to do this. I've been a big fan of profiling my entire life. I was like the nerdy 8-year-old that was reading John Douglas and getting in trouble by my teachers. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys.
So, yeah, so you were one of his many fans who bought many of his books. So there are other books out there too, right, Ray?
There are.
Jessica, tell us, you started with 8 years old, but you can maybe go a little beyond that. Tell us where you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I am an intelligence analyst by trade. I have been in Intel for the duration of my career. I started it actually in corrections and did that for about 6 years right out of college. Everything from assisting the attorneys in institutional lawsuits to assisting in internal sexual harassment and discrimination investigations. Really liked the pseudo intel work that we did there, digging into people, places, and things. And so eventually when I moved into the private sector, I knew that I wanted to get back into a space where I could lean on those investigative and those intelligence skills, and eventually got to spend some time in risk and reputation intelligence, physical security intelligence, and then made my way into the fraud space, and now I'm in cybersecurity. So I still hunt fraudsters by day, but by night, I run ClickSafe Intelligence, where we leverage intel techniques to research and analyze child predators on the dark web via their chat conversations with one another. So we take all of that linguistic content that we can source, we look for patterns, we look for trends, changes, anomalies, really whatever we can sort of suss out and get our hands on. And we turn all of that into preventative education mainly for kids. That is our primary audience, so kids and teens, but also for parents and guardians, as well as law enforcement, and then other child safety professionals like social workers, educators, different things like that. We want them to be able to have the most up-to-date information about how these individuals are targeting our children, both online and in the physical world. And the way that we do that is by going straight to the source, the predators themselves.
You know, I want to just throw a quick shout out and acknowledge that this month is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. It's a national thing. And last year at this time, and I don't know if Jessica, if you know Rachel Fisher, but she's an expert to law enforcement in the area of human trafficking. And she was on Code Red last year, right around the same time, which is kind of ironic. Now we have you, which is giving us another perspective, which I think is great. And I want to just reiterate what Jessica was saying is that the purpose of today's episode is to educate all of you that are listening about some of the dangers of online predators that are targeting children and those that are susceptible to human trafficking. So, Jessica, I don't even know if you realize this, and maybe you do, but I know you talked about profiling, and forensic profiling is used a little bit and in conjunction with the digital age. And really, it's a marriage. It really is. One can't do without the other anymore.
Yeah.
And
So, go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say criminals clearly use the internet and the web to commit these crimes now. In fact,
Yes.
there's a big story right now out of New York City. A 15-year-old boy, I believe, met someone on Roblox, is it called? I never heard of it before. It's a gaming site, if you will. And that was 2 weeks ago, met someone, and he told his mom, they're from Long Island, I'm going to New York City, meet someone. And she said, well, be careful. And he hasn't been seen or heard of in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Let's hope he's okay. But Jessica, this seems like right up your alley in terms of what could have gone wrong. And we don't know yet, but what could have gone wrong in this situation with anyone like this young man meeting people online. It's one thing, pictures and things happening online itself, but then they actually meet and it can lead to very bad things. I'll turn it over to you at this point to follow up on that.
Yeah. What we see in the realm of online exploitation, just like anything else, it's a spectrum of activity, right? So we have everything from simple, I say simple, but like just basic level sexualized conversations that are being conducted with nefarious intentions by somebody with, predatory intent with this child that they are engaging with, all the way up to and including what I would consider this very situation that you're talking about, where a child is lured away from home into a situation. And obviously, again, like we don't know the details of what is happening with this particular child, but there are cases where we have seen children lured away from home, eventually sexually assaulted. Sometimes they do end up losing their lives in situations as well. And there's a whole gamut of exploitation that happens in between there as well. And there are these very robust and sophisticated methodologies that these perpetrators use to engage with these kids online, build these relationships, build trust, build rapport. And they do get to a point where these kids and these teenagers trust them. They believe that they're talking to somebody that they would talk to just like a student or a peer in school or a family member, because these individuals are so incredibly good at what they do. And they're very well versed in masking their real intentions. We've seen predators exploit kids for years before they move to soliciting inappropriate pictures or attempting to facilitate some sort of in-person meeting. So while there are some that they are in it for a quick turn, the ROI isn't there for them to invest a lot of time. There are other individuals who are willing to put that time into targeting and engaging and building that trust with their victims. Sadly, online gaming platforms are the very new sort of like shiny toy when it comes to online exploitation. We've heard about social media for a long time. It used to be like the Yahoo chat rooms back in the day when those first came up. But now, because we have done a pretty good job of educating people about the dangers of social media, online gaming is sort of the new frontier of child exploitation when it comes to online platforms.
Let me ask you this. In profiling, a lot of time we talk about victimology and the risk level of the victim. How does the presence of a person, child, and as they become a teenager and young adult, how does that change their risk level?
Oh my gosh, it's a great question. It changes it tremendously, and it also impacts the way that a predator is going to engage or groom that child as well. We have sourced a ton of different posts from predators online who actually detail out how they target different victims in different ways. So different age groups, for example, they discuss things like younger children, and younger children are very, very prevalent in online gaming platforms right now. Roblox was designed for kids to teach them how to code and all to teach them these sort of like digital environments and being creative. And so we see like 6, 7-year-olds playing Roblox. So when you think about that from a predator's perspective, they look at these kids and they say, well, prior to age 10, kind of like prepubescent kids, they are very inclined to just do what an adult tells them, because that's kind of what we teach our children. When an adult gives you an instruction, you obey them. And typically, it's somebody with good intentions, right? It's mom or dad saying you have to put your coat on before you go outside because it's only 2 degrees out there. Or it's a teacher saying you can't run with scissors because that is dangerous. But that message carries because kids of that age can't necessarily discern, well, this is an adult who's telling me something and they're doing it from a positive place. They're doing it with my intentions, my, good intentions, versus this is an adult who's telling me to do something and they are trying to hurt me. Kids of that age can't necessarily discern that yet. And so the predators know that and they lean into that. They lean into, well, I'm an adult. You have to do what an adult tells you. So you're going to do what I tell you. And then as those kids get older, we get into this sort of like pubescent phase where the kids are pulling back and forth between who is my safe space? Is it my peers or is it my parents, my guardians, the adults in my life? And while they do want to push back, they're also a little bit more scared too when we compare them to teenagers who aren't afraid to push back and aren't afraid to tell adults off in any shape of the word. So the victimology when it comes to exploitation in the physical world or in the online world plays in to everything that a predator does. So they literally go, okay, what is my sort of like preferred target based on my attraction? Sometimes it's just whoever is available. It is a convenience. It is who is the easiest target. But once they hone in on a target that they want to go after, they do that risk assessment. They do the boundary testing. They do that sort of what can I get away with and how can I most effectively reach the end of this journey, whatever, reach my goal, whatever it may be. And that is all having to do with the characteristics of that victim and how that victim engages with them. It literally is like this ridiculous decision tree of conversation that comes into play. If a child answers a question this way, the predator is going to do this instead. Uh, yeah, the victimology is everything. We're actually working on a study right now looking into all of the different criminal cases that have gone through the system, at least that have been documented that we can access publicly, and looking at the different patterns and trends, not only related to the perpetrator, but related to the victims and what happened in the case, because we want to be able to present risk factors and trends from both the perpetrator perspective and the victim perspective, because it is incredibly vital when we're looking at these cases.
Speaking about cases, didn't you have a case that you worked through ClickSafe that your data helped break the case open?
We have had a couple of situations where we've worked with law enforcement or we've found particular details around some things and we have passed them off to law enforcement and we've had great success there. Oftentimes we don't necessarily get a follow-up, which is perfectly okay with us. But yes, we have had a couple of instances that we've passed along some, I would say, pretty actionable intelligence to law enforcement, and they've been able to ID perpetrators from online scenarios that they've then gone after.
Jessica, your description of these perpetrators is very interesting, and it's something that Ray and I are familiar with our days in the FBI, even well before it had morphed or evolved into, quite frankly, this more sophisticated usage of social media and these gaming sites. And I appreciated your delineation of preferential offender, as we would call it, to non-preferential offender. There are some men, mostly men out there, and they just like young kids, Yep. 6 to 12 or something. By definition, they're pedophiles. Other men, and again, it could be some women, but they're more into maybe post-adolescence, if you will, and older kids, whatever. But besides just being it may pay them to be adults with the real young kids. And while they're still adults, if they prefer the teenage kids, they may sometimes, I know you know this, but for our audience sake, they'll pretend their kids the same age, maybe a year or two older, to have a little bit more of authority and in some way. But these are 30, 40, 50-year-old, in most cases men. It may work for them to be that adult with the 6 to 10, maybe even 12-year-olds that you were describing, and I get that. But I know from my own experience working these cases back in the day in real time with innocent images and some of those
Yeah.
FBI and other law enforcement agencies that would do that. We'll get into that in a minute. But they also can pretend they're someone the exact same age. They can even play different roles with the same victim. They'll tell me, "Oh, I'm little Joey's father." Yeah, it's okay if you meet him in the park, next week, something like that. I've had a case certainly in the UK. And the bottom line is a now deceased colleague of mine, a forensic linguist from the UK, coined the term in these specific cases that some of these people, the really successful ones, I hate to use that term in this context, but the ones that get away with it for a while, they're really linguistic masterminds. And
Yeah.
they know how to alter their speech style. And of course, it's mostly digital, using a keyboard, but they know how to alter it to their specific victim. And after, months or years of doing this, they know what works. And
Yeah.
they'll move away from a personality or persona that perhaps didn't work with a certain age group, and they'll stick with the one that does, and they keep up with all the jargon, nomenclature, slang of the day to best, ingratiate themselves to their potential victims. So, yeah, very interesting stuff you're doing, and if law enforcement isn't taking more benefit of the services that you offer, I hope they would perhaps after listening to us here. But innocent images, real quick. Hey, did you work any of that back in the day in the Philly office?
I was the crimes against children coordinator for a few years. So I worked numerous cases with that, yes.
But these are the folks that actually would go online and they'd put themselves out there as it could be, a regular guy that we would know, Ray, in his 30s or 40s, and he's pretending to be a 14-year-old girl
Yeah.
online and waiting to see who would that, attract.
Who's willing
And of
to
course, it'd
chime
be
in and yeah.
female agents pretending to be boy. And I always thought, boy, it would be pretty tricky for me. Maybe I could pretend to be a 14-year-old boy. I'm so far from that now. Luckily, Ray, you're much closer. But anyway, it would be tough to do that. But these guys are trained, and these men and women agents and officers, they're trained so well for some of this that they were making some of these identifications and arrests down the line, especially when the bad guy would show up in a mall somewhere and
Yeah.
go to meet the 12 or 13-year-old kid, and they find out they've actually been talking to a police officer this whole time. So you have a company and you have people working with you. And how does someone, a parent, or are you mostly reactive? Are you proactive? Probably some of both. But tell us, as a concerned parent or grandparent, if your kid is now going online, you finally gave them that cell phone, that tablet, whatever. First of all, the internet should not be opened up to them. You should be able to, mirror everything that kid is doing until
Right.
just about they're approaching 18 years of age, if not beyond that. But my basic question to you, how would parents learn from you? What kind of a website, first of all, you can put out there, and what could they get from you, and how would they benefit in learning how to keep their kids safe?
Yeah. So when I was building this nonprofit, it was incredibly important to me to meet people where they were at, because I understand, as a parent myself, you have different kids with different needs. And you also, as a parent, who I'm guessing that most people are like me, you're trying to work a full-time job, you are trying to keep your house clean, keep your kids alive, get to Girl Scouts and soccer practice and this, that, and the other. And I said, I just want to be the one-stop shop for families, and I want them to be able to consume education and get what they need in any format that they are most comfortable with. So if that is social media, you can find us on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. It's all ClickSafe Intelligence there. Please don't judge my TikToks too harshly. Like, it's tough for a millennial at this point to have to pick up a new social media skill this late in life. I'm
Oh,
doing the best I can.
yeah, you're preaching to the choir.
Oh my gosh. Every time I make one, I'm like, this just does not feel, I feel too old for this, but I digress. Meeting people where they're at. But then our website, we also offer not only all of the academic reporting that we put together. So that's going to be, if you want to read an 85-page report on our investigation into Roblox to, put you to bed at night, you're more than welcome to do that. But we distill all of that down for whomever is looking for it. So if you are a parent or guardian, on clicksafeintelligence.com, you go to the family resource section and you can find one-page guides on Minecraft, Roblox, Nintendo Switch, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, all of the different platforms. It's got to be the ice storms. We're just going to blame it on that at this point. But any platform that your child is interested in, we have a one-page guide for you on what safety settings you should choose. Those all are updated on a regular basis because, again, we want to just give you the checklist. We don't want to have to make people read an 85-page report as to the who, what, where, when, why, how. It's like, here is what you can do in 15 minutes with that step-by-step guide to get you to a place where you're comfortable handing your child that device and saying, okay, you can play Roblox sitting on the couch here next to me. We want to always encourage that none of the guides, no matter how robust they are going to outpace or like they are extra tools to use, but open and honest communication, having regular check-ins with your child about their online footprint, their social media usage, whatever it is, and ensuring that you are constantly reiterating to the point where they are rolling their eyes and saying, I know, why do you keep telling me this? That they can come to you if anything goes wrong and that you will be in their corner and help them navigate through it. We may not always be able to prevent online exploitation, but if we can stop it sooner, we are more likely to prevent more and worse online exploitation from happening, and in some cases, prevent things like suicides because we see that cropping up and continually increasing year over year with young men on various social media platforms. So it feels a little bit dramatic to say that by doing these things, you could save a life. But I think that every single parent who has lost a child to online sextortion would say, no, it is not dramatic because you truly and literally could save your child's life by having those consistent conversations and interventions. So social media, website, and then we also do community events too. So if you're like, no, I would love to have my school do online exploitation or online safety education, we will fly out. We'll do a full day or a full week of training for schools direct to kids. We can do online webinars as well. Every single whether, I guess I should say, just like event like this, whether it's virtual or in person, is tailored directly to the audience that we are speaking to. So the 10th graders are going to get something that is very different than the 6th graders. They're going to get something that's very different from the juvenile mental health providers and things like that. So it is not a one size fits all approach from the predators. So it can't be a one size fits all approach when we talk about the preventative education.
You talked earlier about how offenders will use the web to stalk, groom, or even plan, and how they leave digital fingerprints in doing so. Here's what I know our listeners would love to know. What actual patterns and trends have you seen with predators as they communicate with kids? That way to alert parents and caregivers kind of a little bit of an education on what to look for.
That is a great question. I feel like we could do like a 6-hour episode just on this alone, but a couple of good, like high level ones to look for. Like you guys talked about before, like we can't rely on somebody saying that they are 10 years old. We have to treat everybody that we don't know in the virtual world as if they could have nefarious intentions, right? So just because your kid says, "Oh yeah, I'm talking to another 8th grader in Madison, Wisconsin," the parent should always go, "That could be an adult," or it could be a teenager with nefarious intentions too, right? So you just never take anything at face value, I think is one just sort of like overarching thing to stick in your back pocket. But a couple of things to look for are asking questions, personally identifiable information based questions. So where do you live? How old are you? Where do you go to school? Now, granted, kids love to just talk about that stuff. We see kids engage in Roblox and Minecraft when we're doing our research. They are so willing to be like, my name is Billy and I'm 8 and I live in Wisconsin, because it's human nature to want to connect. And that's why those platforms are there, is to make connection. However, if you see somebody asking and probing for that information, that should be a red flag to look for. Because I do what I do, I like to look for evidence of doing the same behavior over and over again. So I will give you one example, and this was we had a every parent's worst nightmare situation last week happen in Minnesota where somebody abducted a child that they had targeted on social media. It was a really nefarious story. Child is home safe. She was recovered. I'm not going to give too many details out of respect for the family because it is still very recent. But this individual had been present in local community organizations offering childcare services and
Hmm.
saying, I have been a nanny for 10 years. I have done in home. I have worked at child care centers. These are the types of activities I love to get kids outside, exploring nature. And it was realized very quickly when all of this happened that this person had been posting these things in public groups for a long time. It was very consistent behavior, almost pushy about stuff too, the way that he would comment on people's posts and whatnot. Anything where you can establish a track record of behavior, like consistent behavior, if it doesn't feel, if it is giving like that spidey sense of like, this doesn't feel right, that should also be a red flag. So if you're willing to go in and do some looking to see like, well, what does this person talk about? What sort of groups are they in? Again, I do that stuff because I'm me and we live in this world and I don't trust anybody. So I just naturally research anybody that I come across online. But that is another red flag that you can look into. Something else is asking questions about friends and family, not necessarily looking for identifiable information, but we call this boundary testing in the grooming cycle. And what that does is by asking questions like, oh, do you get along with your mom? If a child says, oh, God, no, I hate my mom, that is an opportunity for that individual to come in and sow kind of like discontent there and sort of shift the balance of trust and make themselves that safe person that that child can go to? Or is it like, do you have a lot of friends at school that you hang out with? You know, what kind of activities do you like to do? It's looking for those areas of vulnerability that that predator could come in and cause emotional turmoil, eventually making that child rely on them. Now, what I always tell parents and anybody that I'm talking to is not any one of these things by itself is not a red flag. It's a totality of circumstances. You have to look for multiple different things that are happening at once, as you guys well know, because we don't want to just accuse anybody and everybody of being a child predator online. But when you see consistency, you see pervasiveness, and you see almost like a sense of urgency and goals shifting in a certain direction, and your child might be involved with that individual, that to me is a large red flag, if especially if you can start stacking up those little breadcrumbs that I was just mentioning there. So yeah, pervasiveness and urgency, and if you feel like your child is a goal in that situation, that's not a great situation that we want to be in.
Jessica, a little bit of what you described there was modus operandi of the people, the MO, what means are they using to successfully commit their crimes or at least building up to a criminal activity. But there's also the aspect that behavioralists and profilers like to discuss, and that is signature behavior. What is something, if not unique, highly distinctive to them? What is their fetish? What is their paraphilia? If they really like, 12-year-old boys, is there something specific about them? And it's those kind of, and it may not even be all that suspicious at first, just wanting some pictures that may seem kind of innocent from the beach or the pool because this
Right.
person has a certain, and that's their signature behavior. The MO, signatures rarely change. People that have, again, fetishes, or they now more refer to it paraphilias, they're not always illegal if you just want to think about them, but if you act on them with a non-consenting person, including a child, anyone under 18, it very well could be a crime, state by state, depending. But they don't tend to change. These are the fantasies they've had from early on. Talk about the bad people here. But the MO can change as software changes and new platforms present themselves. They can alter things there. So without using the words MO or signature, your last description gave a very good definition of them in how you put that together. And again, how the true linguistic masterminds, the ones that are really good at this stuff, and maybe they got washed out the first half a dozen tries or even 100 tries, they've learned what works, and
Mm-hmm.
and they now know the kind of kid to look for. And we should also add much like the Nigerian princes who send you the email, $100,000. Usually it's more than that. $1 million is yours. Just send us 100,000. They have multiple um, lines in the water at the same time. No doubt these people you're describing, they don't just have time with one kid at one time.
Right.
They could have multiple screens or multiple times of the day. They're reaching out for these young boys and girls and attempting to do all the nasty things that we talked about. So it isn't just like one, but the really good ones, and I say good in terms of successful and kind of know what they're doing, they can keep them all siloed, all
Yeah.
compartmentalized, and they know they're talking to, Buffy from Winoshia and Jody from, Tampa, and they can know who's doing what at different times. They either keep, handwritten notes or digital notes, and because this is what they live for sexually, and as tough as it is to say that, and really not all of them even have a plan to meet these kids, is my
Right.
experience. But if they
Yeah.
can get something from them online, pictures, video of them doing something, we'll leave it at that. That could be a big accomplishment for them. And I think a couple big clues would be if they never see a picture of the offender or a
Mhm.
video, and I know with AI, you can do a lot of stuff today.
Yeah.
So now that's trickier to determine. But if parents could educate kids that if anyone ever says to you, don't tell your parents, what's the old
Yes.
acronym? Parents in the room, or there's some kind of a digital or text acronym or meme that kids would put up, but parents in the room, something like that. And so, but tell young kids, if someone tells you not to tell your parents or any older members of your family about our discussions, that's a big clue.
Yeah.
Something wrong is happening right there, and something really wrong may happen in the future.
Back before the internet became very pervasive, Jim and I, we used to look at these child predators, and and there's numerous categories to place them in, but the two main categories of child molesters are situational and preferential.
Yeah.
Situational being the situation dictates the interaction with the child and the adult. Preferential is where the molester actually has a preference for children. My question, Jess, is does the web create a new type of predator, or does it just give the better tools to the old ones?
This is a really great question, and it is a very complicated answer. And it's also a very non-committal answer. So I am going to give you the attorney answer, which is it depends.
Yeah.
And I also think the jury is very much still out on this. I know several forensic psychologists who would say that we talk about the pornography argument, and forensic psychologists, a lot of them are going to say, look, access to pornography is not creating sex offenders. And that's a very big blanket statement. There are like a million ways to skin that cat, right? What we are seeing though currently, and again, this needs to be researched to figure out like what the heck is actually going on here, because I think it could be a multitude of different things, is we are seeing, at least what I am seeing, is younger and younger individuals making their way into child exploitation forums on the dark web, which is concerning to me. Not only just like the very young, like we're talking like 19, 20, like 19 to 25. That's very young for a child predator when we look at sort of like the general population that we know, which I think is like, what do they say, like 35 to 65, which is a big age range, right? That's a little too big. But 19 to 25, it's like, that's different, right, than what we've seen historically. We are also seeing this new rise of, and I don't know if you guys have talked about them on your podcast before, but these sort of like sadistic online harm threat actors. So the 764s, Ts, like all of these sort of faction-y type groups that dabble in everything from cyber threat activity, ransomware, phishing, stuff like that, to child exploitation, to the promotion of an exploitation to commit self-harm and like self-mutilation. We're talking like cutting, burning themselves, different things like that, to crushing and killing your pets, like all of these just like bizarre things. And this group of predators is very young. We have a tremendous number of minors who are involved in this activity, as well as those very young individuals, again, like the 18 to 25-year-olds. So when we look at sort of like the way that the landscape is changing, it is really difficult not to go, what is prompting these changes? Is this because there is more access to sexual material online and not just like traditional, sort of like mainstream average pornography, but you can get access to some really hardcore, non traditional stuff at 7 years old if you do not have the right sort of parental supervision. And when you think about the way that sexuality forms, it happens sort of like during adolescence. That's when stuff kind of cements. Yes, it can wax and wane a little bit through your life, but that's when the majority of it kind of solidifies. It's hard not to wonder, okay, if you have a kid who I'm stealing quote from another psychologist I know who is kind of pickled in depravity from a very young age, especially if they do not have a supportive home life. They do not have like early intervention for emotional, social issues, learning issues. They get into a lot of fights. They get into the juvenile justice system, and like their entire outlet is really hardcore pornography. How can we ensure that that individual is not going to turn into something predatory later in life? Or you have these sadistic online harm threat actors who are engaging with other sadistic online threat actors. They're teaching each other how to convince their victims to carve their names into their arms or to kill their pets. And that is their entire like social ecosystem for very long periods of time. If you don't pull them out of that, how can we ensure that we are not creating, or I guess not we, but that these groups are not going to manufacture little baby sadists that eventually come out and become truly clinical sadists as adults? Because we know that sadism is not, you're not born with it, it is created through experiences. So I know that that is like, we just went like way down the rabbit hole there, but I think it is a very fair question. And I think we as a child exploitation, prevention intervention community, we do need to do more research about, okay, the online and the digital space and what we have access to and what is happening currently is very different than what happened back in like the 90s when it was just an creepy AOL chat room and all we had was like ASL, and you couldn't send pictures, you didn't have access to like terabytes of pornography at your fingertips, like you had to get the maggot. Like there's so much that has changed. So I think it's reasonable to suggest that perhaps predators may be changing as a result of the way that the digital ecosystem exists now compared to back when it first was launched. So,
well, with that said, and everything that ClickSafe does with its analytics, what do you believe? Do you believe that the intelligence that you gather, can it be predictive in order to stop a crime before it happens? Do you think that's possible?
I do think it is possible. I don't think that it is going to be a perfect algorithm. I do not think that we will ever get to the place of like Minority Report level predictive analytics, but we see progressions in language. We can watch offenders go from being brand new, like, I just got my login credentials into this forum. And we watch them go from a lurker to subtly very, like engaging on a very low level to sort of just like liking, maybe talking to one or two people, to saying things like, gosh, maybe I would love to like have like an LGF is one of the acronyms they use, like a little girlfriend. I would love to have an LGF one day. And then we see the language shift to like, maybe I could have one day, because they're learning, right? They're learning the methods, they're learning tips and tricks. And we can watch that progression of language and that escalation. And we have absolutely seen cases when you look at some of the other law enforcement agencies throughout the entirety of the US and even in other countries as well, there have absolutely been situations where investigators who are watching and monitoring these individuals go, this person is going to be a problem. They have not, I don't think that they have put their hands on a kid yet, but they absolutely are going to put their hands on a kid. And eventually they do, and they upload the CSAM or they tell people about it. And all of that is because you see them changing as a predator and a contributor to these forums. So I would love to eventually start to be able to use the language that we are seeing as sort of this like risk analysis and, top 10 most wanted list, maybe not top 10 most wanted, but like who do we need to be watching and what sort of profile can we build on them preemptively? Can we find out where they live? Can we figure out what, is English their native language, or are they using a translator? Like, what can we find out about them to build a little bit of something so that all of a sudden, if we need to hit that big red button because they snatched a kid or they got their hands on a kid, cool, we've already got a file that has sort of started to be put together so that you don't then have to, as an investigator, slog back through 6 to 8 to 10 years of chat data to try to look for those breadcrumbs of where could they be located. Are they talking at all about their family? Are they talking about their job? Are they talking about their education? How can we leverage that escalating language and that change in, or that desired change in behavior that they are moving towards to, yes, it's a little surveillance-y, but like I'd rather have that profile and eventually it goes in the shredder if they ever disappear than not have it and then waste time while a kid is being held in somebody's basement trying to build that profile retroactively.
You used the word near the end there, Jessica. You said escalating, but that's escalation is a term we use in threat assessment. And it could be of a sexual nature, of course, but certainly any sort of physical violence towards someone. And those of us trained in the field, and Ray and I are, and we actually teach it, you look for language features and certainly behavior that is indicating that someone is moving upwards on that potential scale, or I should say scale of potential violence, or in this case, sexual abuse, in real time with an actual person. So escalation is a very important aspect. And I would like to think that there, people talk a lot about the bad sides of AI, and there probably are, but it would be, there are dictionaries, there are software programs, certainly AI backed, that could monitor a whole slew, and I'm talking about millions of different people. We're getting into some legal issues here, and certainly First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, et cetera. But certainly for the public sites, and they could pick up on some of this behavior and where it's going. Doesn't mean you go right out and arrest them necessarily and throw cuffs on them, but it certainly means that the right people in this non-minority report world could still look at them and say, we got to keep an eye on this person. Let's focus on this particular person right here. So I like what you're saying and how you describe these terms here. Really, they're based on what, Ray talked about situational offender. I mentioned preferential, non-preferential before that, and of course, escalation. These are all terms we've used for years in profiling of different types of offenders. And I'm glad to see that they've morphed into your world too, whether that's on a glossary page or not, but that's certainly how you are utilizing it there. I always feel that I think it's both Australia and France in the last month or so have, maybe Australia is 16 years of age. I think I just read something about France 15, but basically no social media. It's against the law for kids under those ages to have any access to social media. I don't think that's a bad idea. How do you feel about that?
So I think in theory, it's a great idea. However, knowing what we know about adolescents and how much they like to follow rules, that is where the problem herein lies. Because if you just put this blanket ban on things, then you push the behavior into the shadows. So kids are less likely to come out if they do run into problems because they're legally not supposed to have social media. We are also seeing kids left and right circumvent all of the mechanisms that these countries have put in place to ensure that kids under 16 don't get access to the social media. So just for an example, Snapchat, once that date came and went, they put this basically like you have to upload a picture of yourself and the algorithm or the platform determines, you are above 16 or you are below 16. Well, one girl literally just printed a picture of her mom off on their home office printer on regular paper, held it up to she did it as a test and like told her mom, held it up And the platform accepted it right away. And she said, her mom asked her, she's like, were you able to get around it? She's like, oh yeah, I did it on the first try. So as much as I love seeing countries take the stance of this isn't bad, or we're having problems and we cannot rely on the social media companies to fix the problems. They clearly are not doing that, or they're not doing it fast enough or to the level that we think that they should be. So what other route can we take to tackle this problem? I love the action and I love the willingness to sort of like step into unknown territory. I think that there are a lot of risks associated with blanket bans that perhaps were not as well thought through. And we don't necessarily, I think it's the goal in my, or like the thought process in my mind is like, well, even if we can't prevent everybody, we can prevent the majority of the kids from accessing social media. And that's good enough. I don't disagree that that's like it's better to prevent some than none. But I think that the risks associated with the individuals who are going to inevitably find their way onto those platforms, because they are going to operate more in the shadows, they are going to take more steps to hide their activity and their behavior, they're going to be less likely to come forward. Parents might even be less likely to report incidents of exploitation if they feel like, shoot, technically it was illegal for my kid to be on Instagram and they got exploited. If I report this to the police, am I going to be liable? Or potentially, could I be prosecuted as the parent since I essentially didn't hold up my end of the bargain here either? I think that there are a lot of what if scenarios that make me really nervous with the blanket bans.
I mean, there wasn't always a minimum age for driving or
Mhm.
drinking in this country,
Yeah,
and
that's
they were
true.
enacted by law statewide, and it's U.S. wide now, and obviously internationally. You bring up some good points there. It was almost like seems like an experiment. If you're a 15-year-old in Australia and you're all of a sudden told you can't use social media anymore, that would be a killer for a young kid. I don't mean that literally, but that would be very upsetting for a young
Yes.
kid. However, if you're an 8-year-old and your parents never gave you social media and you know in your head you have to wait 8 more years to access it, and then very carefully so, it wouldn't be quite as difficult because none of
Correct.
their peers would be having access to it or
Right.
they shouldn't. So we're not going to legislate that on our Cold Red podcast tonight or through ClickSafe, but these are thoughts and ideas that people out there listening
Mhm.
talk to your legislators out there and
100%.
see what kind of ideas they can come up with in this regard. And let's see how it goes in Australia and France in the next year in that regard and see where that comes down. I also think one last thing here, at least from this standpoint, I wish, and again, it's easy to get around this, but I always wish there were two X's, formerly Twitter, now X, that one of them, you have to have your real ID, your name. Just like I'm old enough to remember letters to the editor at the newspaper, and it
Yep.
always said, Jim Fitzgerald, Philadelphia, whatever, at the end of the letter to the editor. Nowadays, it should be confirmed through social media that who's ever posting and they verify things on X or people, do the same thing with all of social media. Yes, of course, I know there are ways around that, but have some kind of a steep penalty if, in fact, it's determined that you use fraudulent information. So at least these child predators, and I'm not being naive here, they're going to find ways around this,
Yeah.
but it may dissuade at least some in their early career to just not do it and just keep it in their fantasy world and not act upon it. So a few ideas there that our laws and those who make the laws could in fact look into
Yeah.
and go from there. I always said even with X, they can keep X with anonymous people with their cat turd, screen names, things like that. But that's a real one, by the way.
I have no doubt.
But you can go on that and argue with them all day long. A lot of them are robots and bot
Yes.
farms in Eastern Europe that you're arguing with. People don't realize this, but the other ones, I would, if I was going to go and argue with someone on X, which I don't, I would make sure I'd want to know I'm actually with a real person, and I know at least not only their address, but at least maybe what state they're in. So
Yes.
just one way to make you have a tag on the back of your car when you drive anywhere,
Yep.
registration plate. Of course, you have a driver's license. Maybe there should be something every time you sign on. There's your registration number that not everyone can look up where you live, but they at least know you're legit. You're in some kind of a system that if something bad does happen, you can be identified. I know
Yeah.
easier said than done, but I think it's something that perhaps should be considered down the line.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually got to that place, especially with all of the concern over bots and disinformation and things like that right now within the digital arena. And until the sort of like facial analytics get better to use that for age verification and stuff. And I still do think we're quite a ways away from that. If we do ever get to a point where it is like 100% accurate, we are going to have another, because the current system like and mechanisms, they aren't working. They're not doing it. So yeah, some sort of additional identification mechanisms.
And it's one thing for adults, being fooled by someone. We don't want that either, but we certainly want to protect children, those certainly under 18, and give them as much of a chance of a start to begin with in that regard. So yeah, let's hope somewhere and someday that these rules can be tightened up and more factors put into to social media, that people know if they're going to put something out there, they're going to be identified as to who they are, and right up front.
Love it.
Again, more for our lawmakers to consider down the line. Ray?
Yeah, Jessica, if you were to look at the predators that you've come in contact with over the years, what's the one commonality, or what's the one thing that you would consider to be the weakest link in the armor of these digital predators?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
That's all Ray's been asking, it seems, tonight. I got to find out one myself.
Oh gosh, I love it's there. I don't know. Again, like nerdy, like forensic psychology here. I hate to say this because it feels like a little bit of a low blow, because I do recognize in my sort of belief system, I do feel like there are people who, however they came to be the way that they are, they cannot help it. And if they could like wave a magic wand and not be a pedophile or a hebephile, they would. Like there are child predators who say, I would give anything to not be this way. And I don't ever want to offend against a child. I hate that I have these urges and these feelings. So that's a small percentage. Most of them seem quite content with the way that they are. We don't have to talk about that. But when it comes to something like that, they cannot help themselves.
I agree.
Whether it is preferential or, otherwise, they always do something. And no matter how many times you tell them, you are not allowed to go online and talk to kids, they always inevitably go back to whatever it is that they've been doing. The average predator will go 12 years before their first run-in with law enforcement. But in that time, I think the average is like they can go after 17 kids a year or something like that. There was a Canadian study that put that. Just like any like serial killer or serial offender, they cannot help themselves. And eventually you get very comfortable. You think that you're in the clear. You think that you've figured it out how to stay under the radar. And the reality is it might be that one grain of rice, that one extra gigabyte of material that you download where you told yourself over and over, I was going to stop. I'm going to stop. I'm not going to do anymore. I just want that one more video. Or, oh, I just want one more picture from this kid. Inevitably, that sort of like have to keep going, and that sense of comfortability always ends up getting them. And there are always breadcrumbs to follow. So I think that is an Achilles heel that not many child predators can avoid or get away from, so to speak.
I keep doing this to you, Jessica, but what you just described is need-driven behavior.
Yeah.
And that is when a person just cannot stop themselves.
They cannot stop themselves.
I mean, we would look at bank robbers back in the day, and you could tell, depending how much money they stole the week before, what kind of drug habit they had and when they're going to strike again. And the prices of drugs, what they got at the last. Same thing with pedophiles and hebephiles, others. You can tell this need-driven behavior just pushes them physically, mentally. Ken Lanning is a now retired FBI agent. He did a lot of early work in the FBI and the sexual exploitation of children. In one of the classes he taught, he has a perfect way of describing them that you just described, but he synthesized it to a very short sentence. And basically, whether you're an adult, you're straight, you're gay, whatever, and you're talking to, but now you're an investigator talking to, we'll say, a pedophile. Try to tell that person you cannot anymore ever have relations or sex with who it is you're attracted to. So we'll say the three of us here are straight people. We are told you no longer can date or have sex with women or men, depending on who you are on this podcast, and never again, because it's now against the law. Well, you still have this need-driven behavior. You can argue is biological.
Not if I become a priest.
Well, we can have another guest on and talk about that, Father Grababuck,
or none,
or none.
And Jessica's.
But they do it in that, and that they're taking vows. That's a little bit different. But so the point is, you sit down with a guy who is a preferential offender. He really likes 12-year-old girls, and you say you will never, and that's his need-driven behavior. Yeah. That is what he depends on for sexual gratification. He can think about it all at once. That's not against the law, all he wants. But he takes actions, certainly engages in child pornography, anything like that. That's where the law is broken. So this need-driven behavior, this is not a defense I'm offering to them. It's not an excuse. But there are some people, probably because they were violated as young children. And again, I'm not making defenses or excuses for them, but that's somehow how they become, if not hardwired, certainly, medium level wired. And that's what they see as a sexual release. So, and a way to go about it. So what you were describing there is that need-driven behavior that drives all of us. Some of it's socially and culturally and biologically acceptable, certainly among adults, but others who violate those norms. And of course, the ancient Greeks didn't see too much wrong with adult men having sex with young boys. The culture and the times, they do alter things. I remember in New York City, the group NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. That was before the internet. They would have meetings. Yeah. And they wouldn't share pictures. We actually had an informant in there. I think we can say it after all this, going back about 30 plus years. And he was very careful to say, no pictures. And we don't actually bring any little boys in. But this was an organized group. I'm not sure they're still out there or not. But
sure they are. Sure
they are. They just talk in private chat rooms and
exactly.
forums.
And now they can band together, not just, in a large city. And hopefully they find 10 or 20 people that think the same way among millions. Now they're online around the world, get to the dark web, share various items and pornography, et cetera, and it gets very problematic. So, this is not an easy issue. And our goal here, of course, it's one thing what adults do, but protecting our children, grandchildren, whatever, nieces, nephews, that's what we're all about here. It was disheartening to hear you say that there are now younger offenders out there. Yeah. Perhaps they've always been to some degree, but now they're localized into some of these chat rooms, and they can identify each other and talk amongst themselves. And that's not a good thing. So they're 19. Depending what their fantasy is. I mean, if it's a 17-year-old, that's one thing. But if they're going, of course, 10 years down, that's a little bit, it's a lot different, actually. And again, it'd be against the laws. We as parents and grandparents and people who would like kids have our job cut out, right?
I tell you, not just that, Jessica, about the age it's coming down, which is concerning to me because that means there's more predators. I mean, I remember working these cases when I was a coordinator in Philadelphia Division, and I remember it was like shooting fish in a pond. We could have served a warrant every single day.
Yeah.
I mean, and
I don't think it's changed.
And then it takes 12 years before a pedophile's first interaction with law enforcement. I'm thinking, then there's 17 kids a year they could kind of, victimize. So they're victimizing 200 kids before they're even caught.
I know. The math just bets you.
It does. It's very disturbing to me. What can you say to parents to help keep their kids safe? What's the one thing you would say to them?
I think the biggest thing is prevention is obviously better than reaction, to any situation. We want to prevent it if we can, but talking about it. And I know that sounds like such a cop-out answer, but the number of kids that show up in my inbox, whether it's because of financial sextortion or whatever the case may be, my first thing is always like, are you safe? And then the second is, do you have a safe adult that you can talk to? Parent, guardian, every single one of them every single one of them, and I talk to 3 to 5 kids every single day, is, "No, you don't understand, my mom will kill me." Or, "No, you don't understand, my dad would flip his lid." And I don't know what the situation is with any of those kids, but I know for me as a parent and every other parent I know in my life would say, if my child ever, whether it's online or in a hands-on situation, got themselves involved in this for whatever reason, whether they decided to meet somebody or somebody decided to put their hands on them, regardless of the parameters, like, that is my child and my job is to protect my child. And the reality though with kids, particularly preteens and teens, is that like there is so much shame, there is so much pressure to be perfect, there is so much pressure to not screw up and not get in trouble. These kids don't feel like they have a safe adult that they can go to. And even some of the younger kids, because you have those adults saying you need to keep a secret, or I'm going to hurt your mommy and daddy, or your mom and dad aren't going to love you if you tell them. We have to have these conversations with our kids the same way that we talk about not running into the street, right? Like, you say those things over and over and over again. Every time you walk up to the street, it's stop, look both ways. This almost needs to be the same level of conversation. Like, your body is your own. Nobody else touches it. If anybody ever asks you to keep a secret, you come tell me immediately. If anything bad ever happens, you will not get in trouble. I am your advocate. I am like, those things need to be reminded. I tell parents, like, it needs to be muscle memory with your kids. If something bad happens, you can't have your kid going, crap, my mom's going to kill me. You want your kid to immediately go, I need to tell my mom or my dad or my whomever their safe adult is. And if your kid can't and won't do that, like if they don't feel like that knee-jerk reaction to come to you, then we have work to do. And it's not that parents are doing a bad job. It's that we are up against something that is so nefarious and insidious and difficult to talk about because it comes at us with so many different tentacles. It is kind of like, how do I even start this conversation? Do we start with, yeah. So it's, you can't shy away from the hard stuff. Like, I know it's tough talking to your kids about sex. I know it's tough talking about consent and like body parts and like all of those things. I was the parent that was like, I am ready for this because I've been doing this for so long. And I have a 10-year-old in less than a month. And I'm like, well, yeah, I need to start having these conversations that I was like ready for. You know, we've already been having conversations, but like we're entering a phase of new conversations and I'm getting a little nervous about it. So, but we can't. Like, you need to go in guns blazing and sort of just rip the Band-Aid and be willing to talk about anything and everything, because the more comfortable you are, the more present you are, your kid is going to mirror that. So
I agree.
You know, there's a mother right now in Long Island, New York, maybe wishing she had some of these conversations with her 15-year-old son. Thomas Medlin is the name. I'm not blaming the mom at all.
no,
Because in this case, and I've seen some interviews, she says, just come home. You did nothing wrong. No one's mad at you. He's been missing 14 days now.
14 days.
And he met online in a gaming platform, as we discussed earlier. And is it Roblox? And apparently they put a statement out that they do everything in their power, even more than other social media sites, to make sure we police these things and keep out the bad people. I'm not here to blame them. I don't know enough about what happened here, but ultimately it is the social media companies, it is these platforms, but it's also, as you just so eloquently said, as a mom yourself of a young child, it's the parents too, that from the earliest days, I don't know how many times I would be driving with my sons back in the day with fewer that, 5, 8, 10, 12 years old. Now, see what I'm doing here? You put your turn signal on, but you're making the left turn, making the right turn, and that person has their turn signal on coming at you, but you don't know they're turning. They may not realize that. So you give them little hints along the way.
Yep.
And parents out there and grandparents, we got to do this with our kids today about social media. There's guardrails on the road we warn our kids about when we're in a car. There's guardrails in life that we have to look at, certainly in the social media world. And I know Mrs. Midland in Long Island has it very tough right now. She doesn't know where her son is. Let's hope he comes home. Maybe everything was okay. He just, whatever he did for 2 weeks or so, but he met someone online. He told his mom there was someone online he met going into the city, and now nothing for 14 days. His picture's plastered all over the media. So we're not going to elaborate on that case. We're not a lot too much more that we know, but parents, you do not want to be in that situation, be it
Yeah.
for 14 minutes, 14 hours, or 14 days or longer, that your child is in the company of potentially one of these people out there, and who are so good at what they do.
They are.
They are grooming these children. It rarely happens in 1 hour or one day. And they have multiple kids. They have multiple personas and disguises. I don't mean physical masks they put on, but they have ways of communicating with these young boys and girls to make them do what they want them to do. Sometimes it's pictures, sometimes it's activities, sometimes it's meeting in person. Of course, the latter being the worst of all. The other ones aren't very good either, though. So I think it's great the work you're doing out there with your nonprofit, Jessica. Real quick, give us the website up again to contact you.
Yeah, clicksafeintelligence.com. So if you Google ClickSafe, we are probably going to be the first thing that pops up. And that's all of our social media handles too. So we tried to make it as easy as possible for people to find us.
Ray, any final parts here? Jessica's been very generous with her time.
I do. I really enjoyed our conversation tonight. And I always walk away learning something. And I walked away learning something new tonight too. Thank you for that. That's always a
I'm
good
so
thing
glad.
when you can walk away. So, I mean, I have a feeling I'll be talking to you in the future,
I hope so.
trying to get you to come into a university and maybe
love
give a
to.
speech, especially
That sounds
around
great.
human trafficking. But I usually talk to someone that give me a call. Do you know somebody? And I always do. So Rachel came in last year. Love that. Probably I'll talk to her probably this week. Probably love to have you come in the Folsom.
Sounds good. I'm there.
Absolutely.
Jessica Smith, thanks again from ClickSafe. And yeah, parents, keep your kids safe. I'm sending this out to a bunch of people I know with young children. This site, once it's posted on our coldredpodcast.com website. And folks, while you're there, like and subscribe to us. Check us out on all our social media sites. And I want to thank Matt McLaughlin and Matt Robinson as our producers, Rick Schilling as our music director. And please come back to see us next time on Cold Red. Thanks again, Ray. Thanks again, Jessica. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, everyone.